everybody. Welcome back into Bufnagle, the podcast. I'm Zach, and as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are we doing today?
Zach, as you probably guessed, I'm absolutely fantastic. It's a beautiful, bright, sunny December afternoon here in just outside of Nashville. The weather's been wonderful. We had a wonderful little Lego show I took part in yesterday, and that was a fun time. Christmas is approaching. We're marching our way through Advent. The lesson for today is that it is rose and not pink. And for those good hardcore Catholics out there, you know exactly what I mean. So I'm doing great. And I want to say that I'm thankful for the dog. All right. First of all, I'm thankful for all our listeners. And it is for you guys that we do this on a weekly basis. So we appreciate all the feedback you do give us. And Zach, I'm thankful for you doing all the technological work to keep us running here. And you can reach us, at bufnagle@bufnagle.com and at the bufnagle.com website. We are on Spotify and some other places. You do a Google search on us, and we are right at the top.
We're the only thing. And they asked that Google does ask you if you mean Huffnagel, but we'll work on that.
Eventually, that'll wear out. I don't know who wants Huffnagel when you can get Bufnagle, and so that's it. Well, that's good branding, Zach. And we have a new little bit of information.
Yeah, we do. So recently, we just got put on Amazon Music. So if you're an Amazon Music person, you can search for Bufnagle, and we'll show up because
that's good branding. That's why that is right. So I said to somebody the other day, they said, "What is it you're doing?" I said, "Well, we have actually created a brand with no product, and that is something that's difficult to do when you do have a product, but we've done it without." So
yeah. I think that takes talent, a lot of hard work. So it's good to
talent, hard work, and
have that,
and some good luck. So that's how I'm doing, Zach.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear. So last week we talked a little bit about leadership, and we had some mantras. We're working on developing an 8-part series, hopefully coming to you, diving a little deeper into those mantras. But this week, Rafe, we're going to go on a little expedition, aren't we?
Yes, we are going on what Winnie the Pooh might call a great explore, and we are going to discuss one of the great exploration feats of all time, the fabulous Lewis and Clark journey. I'm going to be discussing for the next little bit. It is interesting to me. It's called the Lewis and Clark trip, or Lewis and Clark, and I just thought of that now. It's not like the Apollo mission, which is also another great journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about with America's favorite rocket scientist sometime. But this was the Lewis and Clark trip was a trip to explore, Zach.
It was explore the Louisiana Purchase, bought from the French because, well, they're the French, so they just kind of give everything up.
Yeah, they gave it up. So late 1700s, early 1800s. Napoleon is there running things in France after we have a revolution, 1776. The French have their revolution. That kind of degenerates into a bloodbath. Napoleon takes over, and the French are deep in debt, and they were like, "Hey, America, you want to buy this land here?" And Jefferson was like, "Bring it on. We are going to go all the way to the West Coast." And he said, "Well, I don't have all the way to the West Coast, but I can get you to the mountains." So Jefferson buys Louisiana from Napoleon, and sets out to claim that land. It wasn't like there was a lot of paper going around back then with signatures and land plots, and people knew what was what. The Louisiana Purchase gave the fledgling the United States, it more than doubled its territory, and gave us a place to go. And but you couldn't just have that land and hold it like you can now with deeds and records and stuff. You had to go and claim ownership of that. And that was an issue for Jefferson because the Spanish were down in the Southeast and the British were out in the Northwest and in Canada. And you couldn't just say, "This is ours." You had to claim it.
Yeah, you had to kind of have people around be like, "Hey, this is our area." Kind of like it was like gangs before gangs popularized New York City. It was just the predecessor. It's built in American history, so of course we have gangs in New York.
That's how it's going to roll, right? So you have to take your gang and put them out there in the place where you are. Now, I'm not going to argue that there weren't other people living there. There were a lot of people living there in that area. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Native Americans living on that land. And there's no question. We can entertain the question at a different date of rights and wrongs of doing those things. But that is the history is the history. And we're going to talk about the history. So Lewis and Clark had this goal of traveling the Missouri River in hopes of opening up trade and coming to peaceful relations with the peoples that were already living there, and making sure that the rest of the world knew that this was our land. This was the United States. We had purchased this from the French.
Yeah. So, and I think it's important for you to note they explored the Missouri River as opposed to the Mississippi River, because at the time, the Mississippi River going north up into Minnesota Minnesota, where it starts, was the border per se of what the United States considered their territory. So they needed to take the other river to find out where it went. And it happened that it ended up starting in the mountains in Montana for them to realize, okay, this is all ours as well.
Yeah. And on a little side note, I read some things when I read a lot of this exploration stuff, and the research into the headwaters of the Mississippi were done by none other than Zebulon Pike, after whom Pikes Peak is named, out in Colorado. So he had rowed his way in his little canoe all the way up to the headwaters of the Mississippi. Around the same time, Lewis and Clark were going out to Missouri. So the Missouri River runs from Montana essentially down. It is the drainage. The Missouri River, Mississippi River drainage system is the majority of the North American continent. Now, it's not all of it, but it's a big part of it, certainly where the United States is. And so they were going to go up the Missouri, and the treaty for the Louisiana Purchase specified that the northern boundary of that land was the northern part of that drainage. And so they set off to find the source of the Missouri River. And it's an interesting thing, because if you've ever walked any rivers, you realize they branch and they fork all the time. And you have to decide which one's the river and which is the tributary. And that came up a number of times as they were taking their trip. So they start from St. Louis. Actually, they start before St. Louis. They actually have to come down the Ohio. They had to get some boats.
I think they start in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh, right. So Lewis starts off there. He makes plans, and they try to get boats, and there's problems with getting the right boat at the right time. They contract with a guy. He doesn't show up. They have to build the boat. So they eventually leave a fort just north of St. Louis. They spend the winter of 1803, 1804 just north of St. Louis in a place called Fort Dubois. It's French. You could say Du Bois. We probably say Du Bois here in the United States. And my guess,
St. Louis we say wrong, so might as well say Du Bois wrong as well.
Right? We don't say Saint Louis and Fort Dubois. We say St. Louis and Fort Du Bois. But they left this place in Illinois in May of 1804, and they go up. They leave in a keel boat, which is this huge 55-foot long boat. It's very low depth into the water. It doesn't sink. It rides real high on the water, because if you're riding the river, sometimes it gets very shallow. And it's 55 foot long with a 32-foot mast. So this is a big boat, and they have a sail on it so they can sail up the river. And for those of you who don't frequent these big rivers, these are
really big rivers.
They're big bodies of water. This is not the creek that runs through your backyard. This is a major intracontinental waterway that at boat. So they have 22 oarsmen, a 55-foot boat, and they leave May 14th. About a week later, they leave the Mississippi River, and they start heading west on the Missouri River at St. Charles, Missouri. And essentially at that point, when they leave the Mississippi, they are leaving known territory and going out into the great unknown. Now, it was not completely unknown. There were fur traders and entrepreneurs and explorers and Native American tribes all up and down the rivers, but it was not, I guess you wouldn't say it was civilized.
It wasn't inhabited. It was, you mentioned the fur traders. The French, for the most part, had fur traders everywhere by the time 1800 rolled around. You look at the way the French colonized, if that's even the right word, with fur traders, having these people come around and set up little shops and stations to allow people that maybe ventured out and wanted to explore a new life a little bit further away from civilization. They had those opportunities because those fur traders were already in place. So it's a really interesting phenomenon when you look at like the role fur traders played in the colonization and creation of America.
Yeah, so they would you would have some guy living out in a cabin somewhere, and he would set up traps, and he would go every day and go check his traps and catch beavers and muskrats and otters. And did I ever tell you I saw an otter here in Nashville? Zach?
Yes, every time you bring up the word otter, you go, "Hey, I saw an otter once in Nashville," and then I bring up the fact that I've seen an albino deer. So,
well, no, those aren't albino.
Well, I saw an albino deer, the one you saw, because I saw the red eyes, so I was able to recognize that was albino, not this fancy different skin color thing going on.
There are so just so you know, in Williamson County, Tennessee, right near where we live, there is a herd of white deer. Well, there's a herd that has white deer in it. Not albino deer, but white deer. And you got to imagine a white deer is not an evolutionary advantage. And they actually come from Pennsylvania somewhere. It's a long, long story, but we'll do white deer on a different story. But anyway, fur trade, if you collect all these furs, you got to trade them in so you can buy like, I don't know, the latest Nintendo Super Pack or whatever it is. So you take him to the fur trader and he gives you your stuff and you give him and then they sell them and they take them to France and they become fashion.
More of a barter system and things like that.
Yeah, and we've talked about barter system before, and we determined that dairy is not a good means for exchange.
No, but fur is.
Fur is lasting.
The French somewhat relevant, and well, they're French, so.
Well, the Pope may be French, but Jesus is English, right? So
hey, you're on.
Okay, so the on August 20th, they have the only fatality. Okay, the group was called the Corps of Discovery, right? And the Corps of Discovery on August 20th of 1804, not long after they leave, they have a death, all right? And a Sergeant Charles Floyd dies of what appears to be acute appendicitis near Sioux City, Iowa. So they are out hundreds of miles now at this point by late
Thousands
August.
Of miles.
100, maybe it's depending on how the river goes, right? Rivers don't go real straight, right? So it depends on how you measure that. So they're out near Sioux City, and Floyd is buried at Floyd's Bluff, and that's the only fatality. The Corps of Discovery was give or take 40 people. All right, 7 military officers, approximately 30 enlisted men, and then a bunch of civilians. There's these 4 people that kind of get. Well, there's 3 civilians and a slave, I guess. Do you count the slave as a civilian? Okay, so there's some interesting history about how all this comes together. The 4 civilians of note, other than people that they maybe met along the way, were a French fur trader named Charbonneau, his 16-year-old pregnant Indian wife named Sacagawea, all right, another woodsman named Drouillard, and then York, the black slave of William Clark, right? And these 4 civilians make up the rest of the party. Oh, and then the dog. There's a big Newfoundland dog named Seaman, and the dog does the whole route as well. He goes the whole way with them. So
yes,
that's the
dogs are adventurers as well.
Well, they are dogs. The only problem is you can't really take a dog to the moon. And otherwise, I'm sure
you can get the dog to space. So.
The Russians have put
it just might not make it back alive into the atmosphere. So
I think that dog is still in space from what I remember. So anyway, they go to North Dakota, right? October of 1804, they get to the Mandan village in North Dakota. And if you look at the map, you'll see the Missouri River kind of goes west across Missouri. It kind of goes up between Missouri, between Kansas and Missouri. And then, no, I got this wrong. No, yeah, it goes up there, and then it goes between Nebraska and Iowa and up to the Dakotas, and then it kind of cuts across into the Dakotas and up into North Dakota, and then it kind of goes west in North Dakota.
It goes west, like in Montana for the most part. It's going west.
Well, yeah, it's going west.
Actually, it's going east is the way it's flowing, but the expedition is going west. Remember, the expedition is going the wrong way through this massive body of water.
Yeah. Okay. So they're going upriver, right? And that's the thing.
That's really hard to do with technology we have now.
Okay, and they're doing it back then. So there were times. Okay, so they're in the keel boat, and they have some other things with them, some other water navigable vehicles, right? And they're going upriver, which means they got to sail, and the wind typically comes from the west anyway. So they're going against the wind upriver, and they're not making much progress.
In the winter.
Well, they don't. They're smart enough to stop in the winter because the Missouri freezes over in the winter. And this, we can see these rivers now. We look at them, and there are barges going up and down, and there are people sailing. Sometimes the river has been dammed up to produce some reservoirs, and people sail and they wakeboard and they do all sorts of fun stuff on these bodies of water. But back then, and they still are, the rivers on the continent are the sewers for the continent, right? And that's kind of a callous way to put it, but that's everything. The river drains away everything that falls on the land. And when these guys were going up the river, it wasn't a clean, navigable waterway the way it is now. They were like huge. You've seen these cottonwoods out in the Midwest, Zach, these gigantic trees growing along the banks. Well, eventually the bank gets eroded and that tree falls over and it goes in the river. And they got to try to work their way around these things. And if you drive across Missouri, you cross the Missouri River a couple times, I think, and you see these massive, the banks of the river are like 30 or 40 feet high at some places. So they're in this causeway, that's the river, and there's trees and all sorts of other junk, the buffalo carcasses and free
buffalo.
What?
Free buffalo.
Free buffalo if you want to been sitting in the river forever. And what happens in the winter, the river stops flowing. Right. So what happens is all the junk builds up, right? And it sits in the river until spring, and then it starts flowing down. So not only are you going against the wind, you're going against the current, you're going against all the junk that's sitting in the river. Right. So this is a hard thing to do. So they make it to the Mandan village in central North Dakota by winter. Okay. And they're going to spend the winter there's a fort. They set up a Fort
Mandan
called Fort Mandan up there in Mandan, North Dakota. And this is where they meet a couple people that become instrumental in the party. They meet Charbonneau, which is the French fur trader, and they meet his 16-year-old pregnant wife, Sacagawea. Now, there's a couple ways to say that. I've always said Sacagawea because someone told me that was right, but then I heard somebody else say that it's Sacagawea. So I don't really know, but she's like the awesomest ever. All right. She's like the superhero before superheroes. She's Wonder Woman, even before Gal Gadot got into that being
Wonder Woman,
being Wonder Woman, or being Cleopatra, or whatever she decided that she was going to be. All right. Sacagawea was born in Idaho, near the Idaho-Montana border, and she was a member of the Shoshone tribe, and she was actually the daughter of a chief. Right.
So she was royalty almost.
She was essentially Indian royalty. Right. So she's the daughter of a chief. She is 12 years old, and she's hanging out doing 12-year-old Shoshone little girl things, hanging out, running around. Okay. And up ride the enemy, an enemy tribe of Hidasta Indians, and they kidnap Shoshone and some of her friends. And she gets kidnapped at age 12, and she's taken as a prisoner or a hostage, I guess, whatever it is. She's taken from her people, and she is carried all the way downriver, all the way to the Mandans. All right. And she is sold by the Hidasta Indians. She is sold as a slave to the Mandans, who turn around because now she's property, and they sell her to Charbonneau, who's a French fur trader. And Charbonneau was like, well, she's property. I'll just buy her. I mean, because that's what you did back in 1800. People bought other people, and it's just the way the world was. It kind of sucked back then in that situation, right? So Charbonneau buys Sacagawea and also buys her friend because he's got two. That way he has two wives because
why not? You're French.
Why not? They're cheap, right? So buy two. All right. So anyway, so he buys Charbonneau. Charbonneau buys Sacagawea, and by the age of 16, when Lewis and Clark get there, she is pregnant. All right, but they find out that she knows the land to the west, and she would be very valuable to help them navigate what's going on up there. So they contract with Charbonneau and Sacagawea to go with them on the journey. All right. So by February, she gives birth to a little baby that she names Jean Baptiste, right? Because Charbonneau's French, right? You can't call him John the Baptist. You got to call him Jean Baptiste, right? And that's in February. In April, they resume their journey with Charbonneau and Sacagawea in tow.
And the baby.
But they take the keel boat at this point because the water's getting lower, right? The river's getting narrower. They take the keel boat, they load it up with goodies for Jefferson, and they take a dozen men and they send them back down to St. Louis, all right, with the goodies, all right? So they take off, continuing upriver now, but they are now in two pierogies. These are not the Polish dumplings pierogies. These are French. These are French canoes called. They typically have
so like everything else with the French, they take something good and fun like food and they make it into dumb, useless canoes.
Well, the canoes were very useful. The pierogies had sails, right, and the other ones.
Yeah, but so they can't feed my belly, and they're not. Yeah, come on.
Oh, these guys are riding through. They're paddling through through Dakota and Montana, and there are bison everywhere, and elk, and deer, and
just all the foliage and foliage and
everything you possibly. It was a veritable North American smorgasbord.
Jackalope.
They're even jackalopes. Yes,
jackrabbit.
Right about jack. Well, have you ever seen a jackrabbit?
Yeah.
Oh, they're monstrously huge. They are fun animals, and I don't know if Lewis and Clark.
It's all bullfrogs too, right?
I'm sure they saw bullfrogs and some jackalopes. Those are all inside jokes, gentlemen and ladies. Someday we'll expose those. Sorry, 8 boats at this point, 30 people, and Seaman the dog. Okay, so they work their way west up the river. Okay, and by June they have reached the Great Falls of Montana. Now, you can't go see the Great Falls anymore because they're under a dam. But the Great Falls were great falls. It was hundreds of feet high. It was like 18 miles to get all the way around these things. They take all 8 canoes and all of their stuff and all 30 people and the dog, and they drag them up they don't lift them up, all right? They go around the edge of the falls and
they take the canoes out of the water and they're carrying the canoes.
No, they're dragging. Okay, so they're dragging the canoes
in the dirt.
These are not the modern day lightweight aluminum canoes.
Oh yeah.
Right. 2 of them are these pierogies, these Polish dumplings that have turned into canoes, right? And then 6 of them are dugout canoes, which means you take a log, which is a big heavy piece of wood, and you carve it out and you drag it up the hill. So they dragged it up the hill, right? It took them a month and a half to get around the falls, right? This is an incredible feat of just perseverance to do this sort of thing. All right. So they get up to the top of the falls, they cross the Continental Divide, and Lewis and Clark are thinking, okay, we take the river up, we get to the top, we walk across the top, and we take the river down. That's what they're thinking. Okay. But you got to realize that
it's simple. It makes sense.
Well, yeah. What else is going to happen, right? It's you go up and then you come down. They're thinking it's going to be great going down the backside. It's all downhill, right? And it's just the water. We just put ourselves in the boats and we just cruise, right? Well, they get to the top, and if you've ever been out there, you see the mountains. You cross the Continental Divide, and it's just more mountains. And at this point, they're thinking, "What? How are we going to do this?" Okay, they're running low on food. They're eating horses. They're eating candles. All right, they're out of food. All right, it's going very badly for them, and they run across this. They run across some Indians. They find some Indians in the woods. Right. And they find these, and they essentially say, "Take us to your leader." Okay. So they take him. So this is Lewis. He's kind of on an expedition. He's taken to the leader. Clark's kind of following behind. And Lewis says,
you mentioned Great Falls, and I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but the Missouri River, there's like a split in Montana. And then the Great Falls kind of like connects it back through, if I'm not mistaken. So there's like a split passage thing going on here.
Well, there's 2. Yeah. So when they come back, Lewis goes one way and Clark takes the other way. And I think Clark has to, let's see, I have it noted here. So one of them goes north. I think Clark goes north up to the Yellowstone and comes down. And Lewis takes the southern route. It gets really complicated because it gets really mountainy. But what really matters here is this story about Charbonneau and Sacagawea. And so they find this leader, this chief, and his name is Cameawait. All right. And Cameawait is the chief of the Shoshone. And he's a little upset because he lives out in the mountains with his tribe. and all the other tribes are trading with the British and getting armaments. All right, it's like there's an arms race going on, and the British are selling guns to all the other tribes with the Shoshones. And he's like, dude, can you help us out? And he's like, well, we'll go back and get you guns if you give us some horses now. So they're making this deal to try to get horses, and there's a lot of doubt, and people are not really sure what's going on. Right?
There's language barriers going on, and
and language barriers. Don't forget
language barriers on top of language barriers. Because if I'm not mistaken, it's the Lewis and Clark speaking English, and then they have a translator, and then the translator translates to some other translator who translates into the native language.
Yeah. So here's how that goes. Okay, so they sit down so Clark shows up then with Sacagawea and Charbonneau, and they're all sitting around trying to figure out what they're going to do. Okay, so Lewis and Clark speak English. Okay, and they speak English to this guy named Private Francis Labiche. His name is Labiche, so he speaks English and
French.
Okay, now he translates from English to French, and then Labiche tells Charbonneau what to say. And then Charbonneau translates it to Hadassah and tells it to Sacagawea in Hadassah. And then Sacagawea turns it from Hadassah into Shoshone, right? So it's this giant game of
telephone,
national language telephone, right? It's exactly what it is, okay? And meanwhile, what hangs in the balance here? Negotiations that are going to get the Corps of Discovery horses, right, and allow them to live. Right, they are out of food, they're out of everything. Okay,
so they're negotiating for their life.
That's exactly what they're doing through a four-person game of telephone across 4 different languages. Okay, so
in the middle of nowhere.
Right, in a clearing in a woods. Okay, with a sail over the top as a protective, like a tent. Okay, so they're going back and forth having conversations, and meanwhile they start watching, because Lewis and Clark say it in English. And then they watch it go down the line, and then Sacagawea says it in Shoshone to the chief, and then they go back. But she and the chief are like making googly eyes at each other, like, what's going on here? And not like moo face googly eyes, but like, wait a minute, do I do it? It turns out, okay, here's what happens. It turns out that Sacagawea at one point stops talking, stands up, rushes over to Camaway, and bursts into tears and gives him this tremendous hug. And they're like, what the hell's going on? All right, it turns out that Camaway is Sacagawea's brother. Okay, so here they are in the middle of nowhere, and they run into her brother, who happens to be the chief.
So now all their problems are solved.
Bingo. Oh, it couldn't have gone any better. The answer is no, it couldn't have. So
I don't think a movie could even make that better.
And that is exactly what Ambrose says in his book. He says he says something like, no novelist would dare invent such a scene. All right, it is so bizarre you couldn't think it up on your own.
Even in the Nicolas Cage National Treasure movies, like, their luck is not even that good.
No, so this is perfect luck. All right, so they get the horses and they ride on, and they buy. That was like in late August of 1805, and by November they have essentially reached the Pacific Ocean. All right, and it's very treacherous going from the top of the mountains down to the Pacific. Right, and so it's like 1,000 miles from St. Louis, or 2,000 miles from St. Louis to the Continental Divide, but it's only 1,000 miles going the other way. So that means it's twice as steep on the other side. Right, and because it's really steep, there's lots of waterfalls, and you spent time in the Pacific Northwest. It is a disastrously difficult thing.
The Pacific Coast, specifically in Washington and Oregon, is not the coast that you think of, Pacific Coast, California, with beaches and sunny and sand.
It's not Pacific. It's
kind of gray and dark, and it is treacherous, like literal cliffs and steep just drop offs.
Not
the easiest thing to manage, and if you don't know what you're going in those woods around those areas, you can get lost really quick, and you can be in a really difficult spot.
Yeah, so they are in a difficult spot, and they get to the coast, and they're trying to find a place to camp, and some of the local Indians say, you probably ought to camp over there, and they're like, okay, thank you very much. So they vote. Okay, so the Corps of Discovery, when they said, should we camp A or camp B? Where should we put the camp? And they have a vote, and what's really interesting is Lewis and Clark. Lewis was a captain, and Clark was a second lieutenant. Okay, but they jointly decided to hold command. They were like, screw this, we're out in the middle of nowhere, we're setting up our own thing. So they were jointly in command, and then everybody else was underneath them, right? And what they did is they had a vote where every person in the Corps got one vote. Lewis got a vote. Clark got a vote.
So it was a true democracy.
Right. Private LaBouche got a vote. All right. Charbonneau got a vote. Sacagawea, the slave Indian wife girl, got a vote. And York got a vote. Everybody got a vote. All right. And this is like the truest. This is
humanity at its finest.
Well, yeah, right. This is what America really represents at its heart. That's what it is. And they vote on the location. They build Fort Clatsop, and they say, talk about bad weather. They had rain all but 12 days out of 3 months that they were there at the camp.
Yeah, so it's like a normal month in Oregon.
One thing, that's where they were. So Oregon. In March, they decide, time to go. Got to go back home. All right. So then now they got to go undo everything they've done for the last year and a half. They start going up. By May, they have reached the foot of the Bitterroot Mountains, and they have to stop and wait a month. In May and June, they have to wait a month for what? The snow to melt. The snow is still too heavy to cross. They talked to the Nez Perce Indian guides, who now know that they are coming through, and they're like, hey, you go this way, it'll be shorter. And they save them like 300 miles. And in July, like I said before, the group splits up. Lewis goes down the Missouri, and Clark goes north to follow the Yellowstone River, and that in itself is a very interesting path that he takes. And then back in August, about 5 weeks later, they rejoin, and they would do things like on the Missouri River, they would find like a branch overhanging the river, and they would like tie notes to them. It's like, hey, it's Tuesday, and we're here.
See you soon.
Hope that you're behind us, and they would leave those little notes behind. And then finally they, at one point in late August, they reached the Mandan village again, and they drop off Charbonneau, and they drop off Sacagawea and Jean-Baptiste, the little baby who's now like over a year old. He's like, tell us about
He's explored more of the world in his first year of life than most Americans explore in their lifetime.
Yeah, exactly right. It's an incredible journey for him, and
he can't remember any of it. Poor guy.
Poor guy. Just right. And then, but at this point, they're now in late August. They're going downstream, down the Missouri, in areas that they're looking more familiar. They're doing 70 miles a day. All right, and sometimes going upstream against all the logs and all the junk in the river, they're doing like 6 miles a day. They're doing 70 miles a day going downstream. They reach St. Louis September 23rd, and by December 28th, the end of 1806, Lewis is in the White House in D.C. with President Jefferson, and they are on their hands and knees in the Oval Office with Lewis's map of the exploration out in front of them. And to me, that is like this. I can just imagine these guys on like, okay, what'd you do over here? Okay, tell me what over here. It's like, this is where the waterfall was, and this is where I shot the grizzly bear. All right, and
this is where we played that joke on Clark that jackalopes were real and sky waitresses exist.
Yeah, so they went through that stuff. So, and then Lewis was made governor of Upper Louisiana by Jefferson later that next year, and Clark was eventually named the agent of Indian Affairs. Lewis ended up dying just 3 years later near Hohenwald, Tennessee. There was Lewis probably suffered, according to Ambrose, probably suffered from what we might today call bipolar disorder. He's kind of manic depressive. He was happiest when he was walking along the river, and when he came back and got a desk job, it just broke him.
He couldn't have that same energy portrayed into the world.
Yeah, and eventually, so there's some people think he committed suicide in Tennessee. Some people say he was murdered. There's things both ways. Ambrose generally takes the position that it was suicide, but I don't know. I wasn't there. No one really seems to know. The conventional wisdom is that it was a suicide, but it was a tragic end to one of the great men of history. Clark died in 1838 at age 68, and Clark's firstborn he named Meriwether Lewis Clark. And so that, if you want to, I'm getting all teary-eyed here. If you want to find a tribute to somebody, you look at who they're named for. And the fact that Clark named his firstborn son after his best friend is a wonderful, wonderful piece of history. So I don't know, what's the read the book. Okay, so you can read the Undaunted.
I don't know how to read.
Yeah, you can read. You can have Carl read it to you.
Good point.
All right. So, Undaunted Courage is the book by Stephen Ambrose, and it's very readable because it's like broken down like day by day, and there are little days here or there, and it's a very readable thing. And if you have a map with you at the time, it's a wonderful story of adventure, of success, of good fortune, of divine providence, of all sorts of wonderful things, and it's a remarkable story that too few people know. I know a lot of people do know it. Not enough people know it.
I think people know Lewis and Clark. They went on an adventure. I don't think they understand what they did on the adventure and what made it so important, especially with the lack of technology they had at the time.
Yeah, that's what's amazing to me. I thought to myself this morning, I poured a cool glass of water, and it was clear and it was clean, and I drank it, and it tasted just like water. It didn't taste like there was anything in it. It was cool, clean water, and the house was warm, and the water was cool, and the glass was clean. And I was like, we live in this age where we are so we can't even imagine what it was really like for those guys. If you look at the history of like, look at a river in a woods that never gets maintained. It just becomes impassable, and that's just the way nature is. Nature's hard. It's a really hard thing, and these guys went through it. And through all sorts of tumult, they lost one man to appendicitis. And what a wonderful story. And I guess I would just encourage anybody out there to, if you ever get a chance to do that, do a little canoe trip down the Missouri. We had a great time doing that. Go explore those.
I would even say if you get an opportunity to do something that's a leap of faith, like go out into the wilderness in like a job or a work environment, kind of based off things I talked about last week, just take the leap. And like do something, make a dent on the rest of the universe, make a difference, kind of lay your claim and say, hey, this is the thing I'm doing. This is what I believe in, and like stand by your words in that way. Yeah.
And it's like, you can make the argument, and I'm sure some people will, they're going to make the argument that all these guys wanted to do was take the gold and suppress the natives. I was like, you know what, that wasn't, the U.S. made its share of mistakes. There's no question about that. But the core of discovery, as it went across the country, it pretty much carried with it the noblest ideals that we have. Did they always execute those ideals accurately? No, I don't think they did.
Has anyone executed every idea accurately and perfectly throughout history? No. So you can't focus on the mistakes and the failures of people. You got to look at the fact that like they did this thing and they represented the wholesomeness, the creativity of humanity as a whole, and they went forward and they tried to do good, and they did do good.
Right, and it is a wonderful story of all that is and can be good. It's a wonderful story, and I just hope that you can do that. Does that take our time, Zach? Are we there?
I think we're just about out of time. We got any other housekeeping things or other little final points we need to make?
Well, I do want to mention some listener feedback. We've gotten notes from a number of people that have responded to our rocket science episode 11, I think it was, Zach.
Episode 11.
Yeah, and they have said, we want more Bob. So like I said, I may have said this before, we are in negotiations with Bob to provide us some more stories, and maybe to be maybe his regular guest. Is that a thing? If you are a regular, can you be a guest?
Maybe he's like he's not a special guest, but he could be like a friend of the podcast.
Maybe a friend of the show, a big brain, smart head friend, maybe would be what he is. But we're in negotiations with Bob to get him on there and get some more of his stories, because we love the adventure. We love to talk about the adventure of life. And that's where we are. So thank you, everybody, again. You know how to reach us. Just drop Bufnagle into the Google machine and watch what comes out. It will be a
pretty fun thing to watch.
You never know where that'll turn up. Zach, is there anything else?
I think that's it. We'll see you guys next time and explore more of the adventure of life. Until then, take care. Have fun.